You walk into your home and see yourself already inside, staring back. Not a mirror, not a dream, just you, where you shouldn't be. These aren't just eerie legends or urban myths. These are real cases, chilling stories of people who saw their double and what followed after. True documented accounts of doppelgangers that left lives shattered, history haunted, and reality twisted. Emilie stood at the blackboard, white chalk dust clinging to her fingertips. The classroom was hushed. Girls in pressed uniforms hunched over desks, their eyes fixed, not on the lesson but just beside it. A flicker, a shape, something wrong in the periphery. To half the class, Emilie was standing alone, quietly conjugating French verbs. To the others, she wasn't alone. Right behind her, close enough to touch, was another Emilie. Identical dress, same chestnut hair pinned in a bun. But this one stood unnaturally still. Her arms didn't move, her mouth didn't open. She just hovered like an after-image that hadn't finished fading. A girl named Marie whispered, "Mademoiselle?" The real Emilie turned, puzzled. The second Emilie didn't. Then, in a blink, the copy dissolved, like steam pulled through a keyhole. Whispers swept the room. Emilie's lips parted, like she was about to speak, but instead she turned back to the board. Her hands trembled faintly. It didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, students began seeing the double more frequently. Once, during a sewing lesson, Emilie stepped out into the garden. From the window, the girls watched her kneel among the lavender, clipping stems for the classroom vases. But at the front of the room, sitting quietly in a chair, was her. Not her, but the thing that looked like her. Its eyes were dull, unfocused. It didn't breathe, but it sat, hands folded politely in its lap, staring straight ahead. Two students, bold from curiosity, rose from their desks. They walked toward the figure, heartbeats fluttering. One reached out, and her hand passed through it, not cold, not warm, just dense, like walking into a fog bank made of molasses. The moment they touched it, the double vanished. Emilie returned moments later, holding lavender stalks. The girls didn't tell her what they'd seen, but Emilie didn't have to ask. She always knew. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. The school dismissed her not long after. 13 families had pulled their daughters. Rumours spread, witchcraft, possession, even a curse. But Emilie never stayed anywhere long. She'd been to 18 schools before this one. Everywhere she went, she left the same trail behind: fear, and a faint trace of herself, because something was following her. And it wasn't just a shadow, it was waiting to become her. And speaking of replacements, story number 2 drags us into the digital age, where a young woman discovered her twin wasn't born. She was uploaded. Shahraban stared at the phone screen, her fingers trembling. There she was. Same dark hair, same cheekbones. The girl on Instagram could have been her twin. But Shahraban had never seen her before. The account had barely any followers, just a few cryptic posts. But each photo made her stomach twist tighter. It wasn't just resemblance. The girl had her scar, a tiny slash on the chin from a childhood fall. She wore clothes Shahraban owned. In one photo, she stood in front of a graffiti wall Shahraban walked past every day. Something was off. The smile never reached her eyes. Shahraban messaged the account. No reply. 2 days later, her best friend called in a panic. "Why did you ignore me at the bus stop this morning?" Shahraban hadn't left the house. She'd been asleep. Then another message. "You were outside my building, just staring," and another. "You walked right past me. You didn't say hi." She changed her locks, stopped posting online, but the photos kept coming. One showed her double, in the grocery store where Shahraban worked, another outside her apartment building. Then came one of her asleep. That night she bolted upright at 3 a.m, drenched in sweat. Her bedroom window, which she always locked, was open. A draught stirred the curtain. She crept toward it, peered outside. No one. But in the reflection on the glass, she saw her. The double stood behind her, expressionless, eyes dark and sunken, a strange shimmer around her like heat haze. She raised a hand and slowly pointed down. Shahraban turned just in time to hear the closet door creak open. She screamed and grabbed the lamp beside her bed, hurling it toward the sound. The crash lit the room in sharp bursts. Glass, shadow, silence. The closet was empty, but lying on the floor was a Polaroid. Old, slightly bent. It showed Shahraban in her bed, eyes closed. Beside her, the double leaned in close, mouth to her ear, one hand pressed over her heart. The writing on the back read, "Only one of us can stay." 3 days later, Shahraban was reported missing. And the girl now living in her apartment still looks exactly like her, but her neighbors say she doesn't smile the same, and she never blinks in photos. From online doubles to deadly deception, story number 3 brings us to New York City, where a slice of cheesecake came with a taste of stolen identity. Olga sat cross-legged on her bed in a tiny Queens apartment, scrolling through her phone when there was a soft knock on the door. Her roommate, Victoria, peeked in with a cheerful smile and a box of cheesecake. "I brought this from the bakery on 3rd, she said in her thick Russian accent. "Your favorite?" Olga raised an eyebrow. Victoria was many things, graceful, mysterious, but generous wasn't one of them. Still, cheesecake. The box was pristine. Victoria cut a slice, placed it gently on a ceramic plate and handed it to her. Olga hesitated only a second before digging in. By the 3rd bite, her stomach turned, not from the sugar but from something else, metallic. She blinked, vision swimming. Her throat tightened, panic rising. Victoria stood silently, watching, not concerned, waiting. Olga's knees buckled. She fell forward, hitting the carpet hard. Through blurred eyes, she watched Victoria walk calmly to her closet. She reached in and pulled out a small suitcase. It was already packed, with Olga's passport, clothes, even her jewellery. The last thing Olga saw before she blacked out was Victoria slipping on her necklace. When she woke in the hospital, her voice was hoarse and the detectives were already there. Victoria had vanished, so had her belongings. But later, investigators found a wig, stolen ID cards and fake documents in a storage locker, all in Olga's name. They said Victoria had tried this before, tried to become someone else. But here's the twist. 2 months later, Olga got an email. No sender, just a single photo, a mirror selfie. In it, someone who looked exactly like Olga was wearing her clothes, her necklace, and smiling her smile. And in the mirror behind her was Olga's bed, but Olga hadn't taken that photo. And she wasn't home when it was sent. Now we go further back in time. Story number 4 leads us to a royal corridor and a ghostly warning whispered from the lips of a queen. The year was 1603, and Lady Elizabeth Hatton stood alone in the cold corridor of Hatton House, staring at the flickering candle in her hand. Her husband was away, and the servants had long since gone to bed. But something had drawn her from her room. A voice, soft, regal and unmistakable. Her Majesty the Queen. Lady Hatton had spent years in the court of Elizabeth I. She knew that voice as well as her own, but the Queen had not left Whitehall in years. The voice echoed faintly down the hallway, lilting, echoing, calling her name, Elizabeth. She followed it down the corridor, candle trembling, until she reached the west wing, the oldest, most draughty part of the manor. There, standing in the archway, was the Queen, not in her robes, not in any ceremonial garb, but in a funeral shroud, her skin pale as marble, her eyes sunken but alive. Lady Hatton dropped the candle. "Your Majesty," she whispered. The Queen raised a finger to her lips. Then she spoke, but her mouth didn't move. "You will see me again, in less than 3 days. When you do, I will not be breathing." The figure faded into the shadows. 3 days later, news came from London. Queen Elizabeth I was dead. What the courtiers didn't know was this: the Queen hadn't died peacefully. Her lady-in-waiting claimed Elizabeth spent her last hours standing upright, refusing to lie down. "If I rest," she had whispered, "I will never wake again." They say the moment she died, every mirror in Whitehall Palace cracked. But one mirror in Hatton House remained untouched, where Lady Hatton still swears she saw the Queen watching. And finally, story number 5 brings us face to face with a leader's reflection and a haunting that may have foretold the fate of a nation. It was the night of Abraham Lincoln's first election win, and the president-elect stood in his Springfield bedroom exhausted but triumphant. Mary had gone to fetch a drink, and Lincoln sat alone in his favourite chair, staring into the full-length mirror across the room. But something didn't look right. There were 2 reflections. Both were Lincoln, but one was pale, faded, ghost-like, the other normal, healthy. He leaned forward, squinting. The second reflection, the ghostly one, smiled slightly. He did not. When Mary returned and saw his expression, she rushed to his side. "What's wrong, Abraham?" He pointed to the mirror. She gasped. For just a second she saw it too. 2 Lincolns, one alive, one not. The pale one blinked and vanished. Lincoln tried to laugh it off, but Mary, deeply superstitious, was shaken. "That's an omen," she said, "a death warning. One of you will not live to see your second term." Years later, after he was re-elected, Lincoln reportedly mentioned the mirror vision to a friend, saying, "It still haunts me." 5 days after the end of the Civil War, on April 14th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theatre. Some say he saw the reflection again in the presidential mirror that very morning. The White House steward said Lincoln stared at it in silence for a full minute and then draped a cloth over the glass. He never looked into that mirror again. 5 real people, 5 shadows of themselves. Doppelgängers aren't just myths, they're warnings, they're obsessions, and sometimes they're deadly. Your face is the one thing that's always been yours. So, what happens when it stops obeying you? Sleep tight if you can, and if someone knocks on your door tonight, make sure they're not already inside. Subscribe before something else does.